Hello and welcome to another special edition of The Racer's Edge, coming to you right now from the Abu Dhabi fan village at Silverstone as we're preparing for the British Grand Prix. As I speak, the camping area to my right, which you can't see on camera, but believe me, it's there, is just filling up with people, approximately 12,000 in this fan village alone. And a big thank you for that to Abu Dhabi, because incredibly, this entire area is going to have live free Wi-Fi for the next 4 days. Brilliant to have that connectivity at the British Grand Prix. Wonderful to have a crowd here, a live audience as well. I'd like to begin by introducing my guests up here. I'm very fortunate to have some wonderful racing people with me tonight. On the far right, needs no introduction to fans of our show, of The Racer's Edge, Craig Scarborough, one of the technical gurus of the Formula One paddock that the Formula One engineers like talking to least, because he asks all the difficult questions and he actually seems to know just about as much as they do about everything that's going on. So Craig, wonderful to have you on the show. Craig has also done some special drawings for us for this show. We're going to look at updates to various cars since the Canadian Grand Prix. Wonderful to have you. To my immediate right, I'd like to welcome Nabil Al-Zaruni, who is the British Manager of Cultural and Tourism Affairs for Abu Dhabi. Sir, thank you so much for your support of this race. Wonderful to have the turquoise logo of Abu Dhabi in the rain here at Silverstone. That's the sunshine we need. We'll talk to you in just a few seconds. To my immediate left, Richard Cregan, the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Yas Marina Circuit, that brilliant circuit in Abu Dhabi. If you haven't been there, you need to go. Richard Cregan also needs no introduction to Formula One people. He was, in a former life, the team manager of the Panasonic Toyota Formula One team. He's the father also of a very quick racing son, and Richard has racing blood in his veins, no question about that, from top to bottom. And finally, on the far left, the editor of F1 Racing, the former editor of the Red Bulletin as well, Anthony Rowlinson. Again, if you're a fan of Formula One, you know F1 Racing, the world's biggest selling Formula One magazine. I'd like to begin by asking Nabil about how much at home you can possibly feel in the rain here. But we do have a lot of beautiful Abu Dhabi girls, boys, and logos everywhere. How do you feel?
Thank you, Peter. Actually, I'm based not too far away in central London. So we are very pleased to be here to showcase our world-famous Abu Dhabi hospitality is all about to all the campers during the Silverstone weekend.
Well, we all know what Abu Dhabi is about from the Formula One point of view, and that's your Grand Prix that is coming up in November this year. Tell us why you are involved here at Silverstone now.
Well, firstly, we want everyone to have a good time and be prepared for all eventualities. So this in mind, we've prepared gift bags with the blankets, of course it's cold, water ponchos, it's still raining, and one golden ticket where a lucky winner will win a pair of a trip for two to the Formula One Etihad Airways Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Wow, brilliant. And I think we've just had that lucky winner. They found the golden ticket.
Correct. We've been giving out the bags since yesterday, and just this afternoon we found out the two winners, Michael and Emma Thompson. So they'll be visiting us this November to the Formula One Etihad Airways Abu Dhabi.
I think they're in the front row there, Michael and Emma. Stand up. Everybody else is very, very jealous. You're obviously both McLaren fans as well. You're going to enjoy that. it's an amazing thing to do. And then, of course, more and more British fans are going to Abu Dhabi. It's not only a wonderful circuit, great facilities, but it's a great place to go weather-wise and so much to do. Tell us some of the highlights from your perspective.
Well, the winners can expect to experience all the wonders of ancient and modern Arabia in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi is developing at a fast pace, but retaining its commitment to its culture and heritage. And we have an intriguing mix of old and new. And even in terms of geography, for example, we have 3 varied and unique experiences within the Emirate. So first, with the eastern region of Al Ain, it is a Emirates heritage land, where visitors can get a glimpse of the traditional Emirati life and the settlements dating back thousands of years. And because of the rich history, it has been recently named to the UNESCO's World Heritage List. The western region of Abu Dhabi, known as Al Gharbiya, makes up 2/3 of Abu Dhabi. So a great reason to explore this vast region is to drive to Liwa, which is the historic oasis town at the entry of the empty quarters, which has the largest uninterrupted sandmass and some of the highest sand dunes in the world. Last but not least, of course, is Abu Dhabi City, where the Formula 1 Grand Prix takes place. Abu Dhabi offers cosmopolitan cityscapes, breathtaking architecture, luxury hotels, and world-class events.
I can vouch for all of that, but let's assume that some of our fans here this weekend really think about this and say, right, let's go to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, let's do it. We'll go there for 5 days, that's all we can spare. 3 of those at the race. What would you do in the other 2?
Well, most of the Formula 1 fans will be staying at the Yas Marina Circuit on Yas Island. So I would recommend them to further explore this entertainment district. A must visit will be the Yas Waterworld, Abu Dhabi. It has recently won the World Travel Awards Middle East leading attraction with more than 40 slides and rides, including the world's biggest tornado slide and the world's longest suspended roller coaster. And the visitors who want to stay at the stay in the motorsport spirit can head down to Ferrari World Abu Dhabi, which is the largest indoor theme park with more than 20 rides, including the Formula Rossa, which is the fastest roller coaster in the world, going up to 240 kilometers per hour. And people brave enough to go on the ride will flex up to 100 facial muscles. And brilliant. And it's very easy to get around the island with the complimentary Yas Express shuttle bus, connecting the parks with the 7 hotels on the island, the Yas Beach, the Yas Links Golf Course, as well as the Yas Marina Circuit.
Well, as I said, there are lots of Abu Dhabi hospitality people around. You can get the information on the Grand Prix, on the country, and I do it, because this race is definitely one of those that are going to be on the Formula 1 calendar for a long time, and being right at the end of the year, as it is, it's always going to be definitive in terms of the World Championship. Nabil, wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got another meeting you have to get to, but very best of luck and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Let's hope the weather improves. I think it's going to be fine on Saturday and Sunday, right?
Yeah, hopefully it will be good. And thank you. It's a pleasure being here. And I would urge you to visit our pavilion. It's just down the corner, so you can get a glimpse of our culture in terms of...
where is that exactly?
It's, I think, just down the road there. We have the falconry there. You can take a picture with the falcon.
Okay.
Calligraphy, as well as offering Arabic coffee and dates, and some information about Abu Dhabi as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Before I introduce our next guest, just quick chat to everybody on the table. Anthony, you're down in the Formula 1 paddock today. What's the atmosphere like? What's going on? The Mark Webber story, I guess, is the big one.
Yeah, that's set the news agenda today, certainly, with everybody talking about who'll be next, whether it'll be a young Red Bull guy or whether it'll be Kimi Räikkönen getting that drive. One way or another, the driver market's going to open up now at the end of the season. So it's a nice new development to talk about. Sorry, a shame to see Mark go, obviously, because he's been a great ambassador for the sport and brilliant for the media for a number of years. But it's good to have a change as well.
Well, we'll all start covering sports car racing now, won't we?
We'll be off to them all.
Richard, if you were running Red Bull, who would you hire to replace Mark
That's a dream if I was running Red Bull. No, I think, you know, when you see the drivers like Mark moving on, I think he's given so much to the sport. But at the same time, I think it's opening up opportunities for young drivers, and I think that's what it's all about. It's so difficult for young drivers to get into the sport now. You either have you have a suitcase full of money, or you're incredibly talented.
Yeah.
I think the latter is unfortunately the most difficult way to get in. So I think that it just affords young drivers the chance to come in through the smaller teams, and then hopefully they'll get a chance to show. So I mean I think there's some good choices out there at the moment. I think Kimi going in there would be a very interesting combination with Sebastian in terms of teammates, and I think that could be an interesting one to watch. But I think there's also some other very good young drivers out there, and I think that's ideal that they're getting the chance.
Scarbs, who's your choice?
I hadn't really given it much thought, to be honest. I think someone said Kobayashi earlier.
Well, that's me. I'm a Kobayashi man. I think he'd be a great teammate for Vettel.
Yeah, I don't think
he's not quick enough to give him a hard time, but he's quick enough to get podium finishes. Yeah. He's a fun guy. He's a Red Bull sort of guy. Japan's presumably quite a big market for Red Bull, and he just enjoys life and gets on with it, doesn't he? But that's only me. But, the other question, of course, is if Kimi did go to Red Bull, who would then go to Lotus? Because that's quite a big hole that he would be leaving at Lotus F1. Thoughts on that, Anne?
It's a difficult one.
They need somebody very good. I mean, it's a good team.
I mean, it maybe Valtteri Bottas. I mean, that's someone we were talking about earlier. Just chatting with one of the Williams engineers who's in the room somewhere. He'd be a big loss to Williams because they rate him very highly. And okay, he's only in his first season, but potentially he's a guy with enough talent to go all the way. That could be an interesting move.
Although one assumes that Toto Wolff's done that Mercedes deal for Williams because he also has a lot of money in Bottas's career, and he wouldn't necessarily want to see him going off running Renault engines.
That would be correct, I'm sure, but I'm sure a deal could be arranged. I mean, it'd be financially advantageous for Toto.
Well, as Richard was saying, there are too many young drivers with talent out there who don't have the opportunity they deserve. That's just a fact of Formula One life in 2013, and I guess it's going to get worse, not better. And there are so many young drivers out there that we all would love to see in the right car, in the right time, in the right place. One of them is going to be with us tonight, and he's with us right now. He is a driver that's, I think, shown enough to prove that he could handle it at the highest level of Formula One. He was on the pole at Monaco a couple of years ago in the GP2 race, didn't make a great start, but he made up for it brilliantly by winning the World Series by Renault 3.5 race the following year. This year, he won the Monaco GP2 feature race. Doesn't get much bigger than that or better than that in the world of GP2, which is the category just below Formula One. And he's also won at circuits like Monza. He's been very, very good in the lower ranks. And he's currently, and still hopefully will be for a long time until he gets the right opportunity, the third driver for AMG Petronas Mercedes. Now, he was going to be at the young driver test here at Silverstone coming up in about a month's time. But because of the recent court hearing, Mercedes will not be at that test. I personally think that is an incredibly harsh penalty on a young driver. He's the guy that's actually suffering the most from the penalty that was issued out in that court. So my sympathies with him, but he isn't going to give up, and this guy is a serious player. And if tomorrow, for whatever reason, heaven forbid, either Nico or Lewis had to miss a race, I believe he could step in that car and do an exceptionally good job. I speak, of course, of Sam Bird, and I think he's with us now. Sam, welcome. Like the shorts, Sam? Very good. Hi, mate. Now, Sam, I know you haven't got that much time. He's got to go back and finish data analysis or preparation or simulation back in the GP2 paddock. You've got to race this weekend, yeah, absolutely. But thanks so much for joining us. Actually, what are you going back to do straight after this?
Well, I need to prepare for the wet now, because when I got here, as you can tell, I was wearing shorts, preparing myself for the dry weather for this weekend. We've done the dry setup, but I now need to go through wet data analysis, which is completely different to the dry stuff, obviously. So that's what I will be doing when I get back there.
Well, Sam, we won't keep you any longer than necessary, but we've got a couple of props here we'd like you to help us look at. The first is a steering wheel from, I think you'll recognize this. You can describe it, in fact. And what I'd like you to do, if possible, is talk us through the procedure of a Formula One start.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So this
Shall I hold the mic, and then you've got...
you hold the mic.
Yeah, there we go.
Right, so this is a Nico Rosberg-based steering wheel. Lewis has a slightly different layout, guys, so if the people on the right can see that.
Let's just move this water jar.
Yeah, so Formula One steering wheels, there's quite a lot going on. For me, this is completely natural. To you guys, it probably looks a bit alien-like, and you wouldn't know your way around it. For me, going around the track, it's completely natural to me to, shift, change the diffs, change the mixtures, the torque modes, do a default mode, change the harvest modes, everything. But for a race start, there is a specific thing that we have to do. So we will be told what to do in terms of our harvesting, which is the KERS, kinetic energy recovery system, how much we are storing in the battery. Once we get the battery full, we might be told to boost a little bit, to lose a little bit of the charge. Towards the end of the lap, they'll tell us how many burnouts to do just before we get to the grid. It may be 3 to 5 burnouts before we pull up to our grid slot. Before we do them, we have to turn on RS modes, which is race start mode. That changes the mixture and the torque.
Let's just show that if you can turn it around.
So this is mixture here and torque here. If we turn RS modes on, we then go to mix 1 and torque 1. Effectively, once we turn them off, it goes back to the pre-selected mixtures on these rotaries. So we then do the burnouts in the RS modes. Once we pull up to our grid position, we put the car back into neutral, turn RS modes back off, then do a thing called a bite point find, which ramps up and down through the rev range, finding the perfect bite point ready for your launch, basically recalibrating the clutch. Once we've done that, we reselect neutral, reselect RS modes again after we've done the bite point find. Then we pull in both clutch levers, select first gear, then release one of them so it's sitting flush with the down change paddle. This actually is an older spec one, but we've got one that actually sits flush here. So that when you release the fully engaged clutch, you're instantly moving. There's no delay time. So you get away from the lights instantly. And then when you go to the last red light on the dash here, which is a pre-selected rev range, you're ready to go. When the lights go out, obviously release that clutch, hold the other one in the pre-selected position for about half a second, and then release that one. Hold the throttle constant, and when you're through the first corner, hopefully take RS modes back off again.
It sounds unbelievably complicated, but from your point of view and the point of view of any driver out there, that would be just completely ingrained, and they would do it without even thinking.
It's just a procedural thing, Peter, to be honest. It's for me, that's not complicated. It's like for you guys driving in the rain, doing your windscreen wipers, talking on your Bluetooth, not on your hand, obviously. Changing the track on the stereo, turning the volume up and putting your indicators on. It's the same kind of concept, only on a steering wheel with 50 buttons.
And Sam, how much of that is just a natural rhythm of releasing the paddles, or how much of it you actually reacting to what the car's doing as you're pulling away?
You are told to do a procedure. There are certain things that give you indications of when to let go of paddles, etc., etc. So it is just a procedural thing. Whereas in GP2, there's far more kind of skill or luck, dependent on what you want to call it, to your start, because we don't have any. There is a procedure, but it's more feel. We have to feel where the bite point is, and on the F1 car, we just know where it is because it's a much more complex system.
So how can one car in a team make a worse start than the other?
If they get the procedure wrong.
Oh yeah.
well, not if they get it wrong, but if they're
So every time Mark Webber makes a bad start, you think he's probably messed the procedure up.
I don't know
somewhere.
why. That Seb is capable of doing good starts all the time. They have the same procedures for both cars. I don't understand why, whether he gets finger happy to release the first clutch lever too quickly, trying to be a bit too quick off the line, a bit too clever, I don't know. But yeah, it's a strange one how some people can do that on a regular basis. I think we saw Barrichello as well when he was in F1 recently in the Williams, used to do quite a few bad ones as well.
And what's the difference? You said this was a Nico wheel. What's the difference between Lewis and Nico in these wheel designs?
Well, Lewis has come from McLaren, and McLaren's wheel was a lot simpler, basically, had a lot less going on the wheel. And Lewis has obviously come to us and gone, no, I don't like how busy the steering wheel is. Can you please simplify it? And he didn't like the way the rotaries were designed. So we've given him a wheel with one less rotary and just less things to look at, so it's a little bit less busy. Also, he has things in different positions, so his DRS activation is in a different position to Nico's, as well as his KERS boosting. So he actually has his KERS boosting on a paddle on the back, whereas Nico obviously has it on a button here. That's one major difference. And then he has his DRS on a button over here.
And which rotary does Lewis do without?
He does without the middle default rotary. So this is the middle one.
The blue one
here.
there. And what does that mean if he doesn't have that?
He's just got different things in different areas. Nico likes to have an awful lot of things to play with on the middle rotary. Whereas Lewis has just got one rotary that does a bit more on one, and then a lot more simplified in terms of the entry, mid and exit differentials.
Staggering, isn't it? Was the Toyota wheel similar to this, or have things changed even in the last 5 or 6 years?
No, I think it's, you know, it's just moved on so much in the last couple of years as well. I mean, it's just every year it's evolving, and I think what we have to understand is that, you know, what you described as a start procedure is happening not in a quiet, nice, relaxed mode as we are here. It's when your blood pressure is up. It's when everything is at the height. And I think that's what we really have to understand, is that the human factor comes into it. And as you said, we had a few drivers who just could not get this right. It was they could test it, they could try it, we could, no problem. Then it would come to race day, and you know, a couple of guys they would miss one of those steps, and then you get bogged down, and that's it.
Come on, which drivers?
Well, Ralph was pretty good at it, and Olivier Panis was similar as well. You know, and we could test with Olivier. You know, we did special tests at that time when you could test during the season. So we would go to Paul Ricard and we would spend maybe 2 days doing starts, launches, and everything. Then it would come to race day, and it's that pressure. It's incredible. I can only imagine what it must be like for a driver, that you're coming around, you're doing your burnouts, you're getting your instructions on the radio, and at the same time you're going into your start position for a Grand Prix. So it was incredible. But you know, most of the times that, as you said, when the launch didn't work right, it was because of that procedure. And you can go back through your data, and you can see exactly the procedure that was followed, and you can see where it went wrong, and then you can try and simplify it. But then that was drivers coming up in a different time, in a different era. Whereas, you know, the young guys now just take this in their stride and they just do it, you know, second nature.
I was talking to, I mentioned this to you once before, I was talking to Nick Fry once when it was BAR Honda, or it was just Honda actually, when Jensen was there, and onto the formation lap, Jensen didn't move. Nick was standing right next to the car on the grass, he didn't move, and eventually got it going. And after the race, he said to Jensen, what happened? Why didn't you get away? And Jensen said, I just had a complete mental blank. I just couldn't remember the procedure at all. Just went from me. And I guess that, you know, it could happen. It is such a that wasn't that complicated back then. I mean, it's even worse now. Sam, we've got something else here for you. It might be reacquainting you with an old friend, kind of. But this is a Williams wheel.
Oh wow! Okay.
And for those who don't know, Sam has done a lot of work with Williams as well in the simulator and in testing. And I just wondered if it'd be interesting for you to look at that and tell us what strikes you now about the main difference between that and the Mercedes.
Can I take a picture of it and then report back to Mercedes?
This is a Pastor Maldonado wheel. That is a Nico wheel. Yeah. Yep. And Bottas again is quite different from Pastor, I believe.
Well, you can see on quite a few of the things there's less. It's less busy. Obviously, the design is completely different and where things are laid out. The main thing that is the same, obviously, is the thing that we aren't allowed to control or change, which is the display here, which every team has to have exactly the same thing. However, there's less entry and mid-diff configurations. So presumably they have larger steps on their entry and mid-diffs from what we can do. We've got 12 positions, they've only got 4, so they can only make those 4 steps during the race, whereas we on a tyre stint could necessarily change different things for different corners much more easily.
That's quite interesting, Scarbs, isn't it? That they have fewer steps, and the effect of the diff change is enormous, I guess, in terms of tyre management.
Yeah, you want to create more understeer to look after the rear tyres. So when I've been testing, for example, long stints at Monaco and at Abu Dhabi in the Mercedes, one thing typically that I will do is basically lock the entry and mid diffs more and more and more as the stint goes on to create more and more understeer to preserve those rear tyres. However, you don't want to go too far with that, because if you don't get the car turned into the corner enough, then you're going to promote an on-power problem where you have to turn the car by actually sliding the rear of the car. So there is a compromise on that, but yeah, that's what we do in car to look after the rear tyres.
Sam, I know you're pressed for time. We'll let you go with just one question, and that is how things going this weekend so far from your point of view. How you must be looking forward to driving this car, this GP2 car around Silverstone. Another win, hopefully, for you.
Yeah, obviously the last feature race I did was very good in Monaco. Won that by 24 seconds, so that was good. Don't know whether I can repeat that here, but I'll give it a damn good go, Peter.
Well, Sam, I know everybody here will be behind you as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
One last thing,
yeah.
I've just noticed on this wheel that we used to do in the Williams, they've got a sliding fingers technique for the starts, one thing that we progressed with, which is what I was talking about with the Mercedes wheel. So basically for their starts, they will fully engage one clutch lever and have the other one, if you can see that they've got these kind of jagged clutch levers here, they will have one sitting flush against an up lever or a down lever. Then they will move to the next lever to get a little bit of clutch slip, and then they will release it. So they've got 2 stages of basically moving the clutch to get the best possible traction. But
well, maybe they need to put that onto the Merc wheel.
Me and Nico, well, Nico's come from Williams as well, and we have told them about it, but they believe that their system's better. So there we go.
Sam, brilliant. Thanks
Thank you very much,
indeed
guys.
for joining us. All the best to you. Scarbs, come and move up. What do you think of all that, Scarbs? Amazing stuff, isn't it?
I mean, it'd be great if we could get some really close views of this and everyone just get their hands on them. The Williams one in particular is just an amazing work of art in carbon fibre and with all the electronics. It's, just one of those probably is worth more than everybody's car here put together. It's hard to think about that.
And we've been particularly interested in the last few shows about the difference between Bottas and Maldonado, but quite clearly within every team there's probably differences from one driver to the next in the paddle design and the location at the front. And I think in the case of Bottas and Maldonado, there's quite a big difference here in terms of the dash display.
Yeah, that's right. If I switch it around for everyone's benefit, the 2 Williams drivers have very different steering wheels. I forget which way around it is, but one of the steering wheels is much more like the Red Bull, which is more like a kind of butterfly shape, where this dashboard...
That'll be Bottas.
As you can see at the top, is actually attached more towards the back of the wheel, and overall it's a slightly lighter, more modern design of wheel. But as you say, every driver has their own preferences on where the buttons are and the paddles and bits and pieces, and obviously Lewis and Nico are a classic example of that.
Well, Scarbs, in a minute we'll go through some of the updates we've seen on the cars, or we believe are going to be on the cars for this weekend from the Canadian Grand Prix. But before I do that, Anthony, talking about Williams, big edition of F1 racing this month. Williams 600 Grand Prix coming up in Hockenheim. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Yeah. Silverstone.
Well, the actual race, apparently, the actual 600th race is Germany, is the next race. Williams, quite correctly though, have decided to make their celebrations here because it's their home race. They had their first win here back in 79.
79,
yeah. So they're going to have some various celebrations going on this weekend, which will be a lot of fun.
And the slight discrepancy there is with the 1982 San Marino Grand Prix, which was a World Championship Grand Prix, and oddly, Williams and a few other of the Cosworth teams at the time, Cosworth powered teams, didn't actually participate in that Grand Prix. There was quite a big political furore going on, and it was only contested by the major grande manufacturers, the non-Cosworth teams, and that was included in the Williams 600. But at the same time, not included is the 81 South African Grand Prix, which was a race won by Williams. Bernie Ecclestone shook the hands of the Williams driver on the grid and said it would be a championship race. This race would count for points. Although on that occasion, none of the big grandee manufacturers were racing. It was mainly a Cosworth race. And indeed, it did count for points for about 3 months. And then they took the points away. And Bernie's driver won the World Championship by about 7 points. So that race, I think, in many ways deserves to be in Williams's catalogue of victories. And it's a shame, really. But having said that, a big weekend for Williams. I've worked for Williams. I love the team. And only yesterday I was at the memorial service for Lady Virginia Williams. Very poignant, emotional day. Lots of wonderful people there, Formula One people. Lots of ex-Williams drivers, lots of wonderful Formula One drivers in general, and it just shows, I think, how much esteem everybody holds, not only obviously Lady Virginia, but obviously Sir Frank and everything that Williams had done. So a big weekend for the Williams team, and all the best with the current issue of the magazine, because you've got a great photograph in there in which you've got a grid of all the winners in the Williams history,
basically
all lined up.
A little bit of Photoshop magic. We've managed to get all the Williams winning cars back from 1979 right through to Pastor's FW34 last year, and make them look as if they've done a sort of, they're all on the grid at the same time racing. It's actually Silverstone picture that we've used as the basis for it. No, it's quite clever. I can't take any credit for that. It's all our art team, but it looks nice. It's quite convincing.
Well, Scarbs, let's get on with some of the technical updates that have caught your attention in Canada and in the build-up to Silverstone. And we have some of your drawings, which we're not going to see here in this studio, but obviously you'll be seeing out there on the live stream. And the first, should we start with Red Bull, or should we start with Ferrari?
We can start with Red Bull.
Let's start with Red Bull.
Red Bull produced a handful of updates to the car at the last race in Canada. A little bit of background, obviously the last few races we've had have been somewhat one-off circuits, Canada being a very straight circuit, Monaco being a very high downforce circuit, and before that we had Barcelona, and Friday practice was wet, and I think we're going to be wet here tomorrow as well. So the teams haven't had the chance to actually race the developments that they've been producing for the past few races. So it was quite unusual to see so many new parts across so many cars in Canada. Red Bull's key changes were in 2 areas around the back of the car. If we remember back to Monaco last year, Red Bull were almost excluded from the race for having little slots in the floor just ahead of the rear tyres, because as much as they were slots, they weren't joined to the outside of the floor and therefore weren't actually slots.
Right.
They've actually come back almost a year later, and these little slots just in front of the tyres, again, I apologise to the people that here that can't see this, we've got it highlighted in yellow on the picture, just to take some of the high pressure air above the floor and just squirt it underneath the floor in front of the rear tyre. Because what happens is, if you could imagine a tyre spinning down the road with the air hitting it and the air's spilling off on all 4 corners of the tyre, the inner one of those sort of bow waves coming off the tyre goes under the floor and goes into the diffuser and actually wrecks the diffuser performance. And clearly that's one of the key areas where the cars create downforce. By having these little slots, it actually reduces this effect, which is called tyre squirt, which is a fantastic little aero term, and that just offsets that, and them little holes actually really increase the performance of the diffuser. The other change that Red Bull have done was just change on the rear wing end plate, the large flat plates that hold the wing to the car, and they've just put a little slot along the front of that, and it's very similar to we've seen Marussia and Virgin and Williams using, and somewhat similar to what Ferrari have got on theirs. And that just, again, just encourages more air to pass through the rear wing, and again, the more air you get through the wing, the lower the pressure, therefore the more downforce you're creating. So it's lots of little tweaks they've got going on around the car. They also had some little changes to the front wing as well. We haven't got a picture of that today. But they had these little triangular pieces of bodywork on the front wing, and these are what we call vortex generators, and they just create a little spiral of air. And something that's probably half the size of your mobile phone, big piece of carbon fibre, is actually there to improve the flow off of the front tyres, which seems really counterintuitive for anyone trying to look at it. You'd assume it's about creating downforce directly on the wing, but it's about how the flow goes over the tyre and helps the turbulent wake that comes out from behind the tyre. And I know that we're going to see some more of those on the cars this weekend. I can't name names because I've got a bit of inside information, but yeah, that'll be something we'll probably cover in a future episode.
Well, tomorrow.
Yeah, we can cover that tomorrow. It'll be public then, won't it?
Are those slots something that other teams could reproduce relatively quickly?
On the rear floor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teams have already got them. Ferrari have run them fairly consistently, Sauber, Mercedes, Force India as well. It's one of those little pieces of development that some teams seem to pick up on and others don't. So McLaren, for example, haven't been running them.
Anthony, the Pirelli Mercedes verdict, we chatted about that on a YouTube video, but as the dust has settled now, what is the thinking in the paddock about the Pirelli situation? Some teams a little bit unhappy still about compound selection. What's your take on Pirelli in Formula One at the moment?
Well, my question would be, and I'll try and ask Paul Hembry this weekend, would be whether Pirelli want to stay in the sport, because I can't really see what they're getting out of it other than a whole load of bad PR and bad publicity. Obviously, they're getting money from the teams, 10 million a year, I gather, which is about the fee that they're paid for tyre supply. But they're sort of getting kicked from pillar to post and being used as a political football, which is really not what they wanted. And the whole affair in Paris last week was just a bit of a mess. And they raised the point before they even went there, which was, why are we even being called into question? We're just a tyre supplier. We've got nothing to answer. And yet they're in effectively a sort of FIA court of law. It's not actually a court of law, but their whole reputation's being called into question. It's quite a bad situation for them, really.
Richard, your take on from afar on the Pirelli situation?
I agree. I mean, I don't think it's definitely not good for Pirelli themselves. I mean, they're being dragged through the mire on this, and I think that they came into it with great intentions. I think they did a fantastic job in the beginning of mixing it up. I mean, if you saw the difference that there was from one year to the next because of the Pirelli tyre, I think we've all enjoyed racing, in many respects because of that in the last couple of years. But again, I think it comes back to that big discussion about testing and the amount of testing and the control of testing that there is in Formula One at the moment. And I think that we all like to refer to Formula One as the pinnacle of motorsport. So I think the whole governance around Formula One at the moment needs to be reviewed. I think that the whole FOM, FIA situation, I think it has just highlighted some major issues that are there. And I think FIA in particular need to step up and maybe take charge in terms of the regulation and the application of those. And I think that there's a lot of people like to sidestep particular issues and decisions. And I think Charlie was brought into that during this crisis, basically, where we there was lots of reference of what was asked of Charlie and what wasn't. And I think the great thing about Charlie Whiting is he will actually answer you. And he will make a decision, and he's one of the great people in our sport. And I think he needs support rather than to be used as a scapegoat. So.
Wouldn't it be wonderful though if we could do a 3-week test at Abu Dhabi in January, February every year?
Yeah, we'd love that. I think the teams would like it as well, actually. But
I'm exaggerating, obviously, with the 3-week business. But the reality is, if you did a week's test in Abu Dhabi and you knew it was going to happen, and you could promote it, and you could open it to the fans, it could be a commercial success, I dare say.
Definitely, and it's something that we've been in discussion with the guys about, and it depends on where the calendar is going to start. It looks like it's going to start in Bahrain next year. So the ideal situation is, you do a week's testing or 10 days in Abu Dhabi, you rebuild, you go and do a test in Bahrain, and then you rebuild and you do the race. And I think that's the way it has to go. I think apart from Abu Dhabi, I think that is the way it'll work for the sport. Also in terms of weather, in terms of grip levels. I mean, the difference that it makes to test somewhere like Abu Dhabi, where you've got good temperature, you've got good track temperature, you've got good grip level in itself. So it gives you relevant data that the guys can use. You're not using data from a circuit that's irrelevant in terms of feedback from the drivers. So I think the whole package of F1 needs to be rethought in that sense.
Now, if anybody from the floor would like to ask any questions, we have a mic down, which we'll grab from here actually. But if you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up as Scarbs is talking, or any of us are talking about any of these issues. And of course the other point, Anthony, I think, just going back to the Pirelli Mercedes situation, is poor Sam Bird. I mean, that is a really harsh penalty, I think, for that guy not to be, you know, the 2 days when he could have been out there in the car here at Silverstone on a great circuit, and he's not allowed to run for no fault of his own.
It's really tough for him. But on your point about potentially bringing back testing, which is going to happen anyway, I'd like to go even further and say, why don't we ban wind tunnels so that teams are no longer allowed to just use wind tunnels for aerodynamic development, huge cost saving, and just run testing? Why not?
What do you think about that, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, we had the luxury of 2 tunnels in Cologne, and there were amazing technology. It didn't get us to win. I think what you have to look at is, you know, and what's the driving force behind it. And we're talking about detail earlier. Is the individuals? It's the Adrian Newey's, it's the Ross Brauns, and all those people in the background that's doing the hours and hours of testing in the tunnels. So I think there should be a certain amount of wind tunnel testing. But I think there should be more track testing, because that's where the drivers can get out. That's what we're missing out on the young drivers. We're not giving them time in the car. No. It's about track time. And if we're not track testing, they're not getting the time. And I think that's a shame for those guys.
Richard, it's interesting, Scarbs joining on this one. It's interesting that tunnel you mentioned, the 2 tunnels at Toyota, used by Ferrari and McLaren now.
Yes.
One of them winning races again, the other one not. Interesting, I mean, isn't it?
They're an amazing piece of technology, but again, it's about the team that's behind it. It's about how you use that information. And it was quite interesting, you know, you talk about those slots in the floor and various different pieces on front wings and rear wings. You can go down and you can look at those pieces and you can actually copy them very, very accurately through modern photography, and you can actually convert them into CAD drawings and you can try them. But depending on the original concept of the car, as you know better than I do, you can actually put those pieces on your car and they're not going to give you a performance increase because the original concept is not right. So it's a very, very tricky business, aerodynamics. And I think reducing wind tunnel time but increasing track time is the key. And again, getting the young guys in the car and getting them track time. And then we see the likes of Sam out there testing, and he'll be able to prove that he's worthwhile of a full-time drive.
Speaking of that young driver test, I was talking to Davide Valsecchi the other day, the current GP2 champion, who's a 3rd driver for Lotus F1, and he was saying that he's been told that he'll be doing 2 days, if not 3, and he's going to be driving Kimi's car on one day and Grosjean's car on the next day, which is quite an interesting use of the 3rd driver to see how the 2 cars actually compare. Not the sort of thing you could ever do over a Grand Prix weekend, but Lotus making very good use of that test, and no doubt, Valsecchi's a very quick driver anyway. So that's an interesting one. Scarbs, next on your agenda, let's talk about the red cars, Ferrari.
Yeah, I mean, Ferrari, as I was saying earlier about the wet Barcelona free practice a couple of months ago now, Ferrari had a big package that they tried to run and didn't. And again, these parts appeared in Canada. And again, quite a different car that we saw there. The main changes are around the nose of the car. And one of the obvious changes is little white winglets that they put above the main front wing, which we call cascades, were changed. Normally they mount to the end plate. These ones curved down and joined the main wing, and it was all about, again, turning the airflow around the front of the tyre and setting up all these vortices which manage the front tyre's wake. And I expect to find those front wings on the car again this weekend. It wasn't a Canada-specific development. They've also changed the area underneath the nose, and the pillars that mount the front wing, they reshaped them and actually put a little chin underneath the nose above the middle section of front wing, which we've seen quite a few teams do. Force India in particular, Renault, I mean Sauber have got one, Red Bull have tried little ones. And this little chin actually just creates a little tiny bit of extra downforce from what otherwise should be a neutral section of front wing. So again, it's just a tiny little bit of performance. And then the last thing, which was originally on both cars, but only Alonso ran, was the vanes around the side pods that were changed. I think Massa was due to race them, but I think he somewhat damaged them during qualifying. And these pieces where you actually see a vane go over the top of the side pods and then curve around is all about curving the airflow down over the side pods and this helps redirect the exhaust plume, which, as we've spoken about so many times, is supposed to be pointing upwards, but the teams are able, with the Coanda effect and with all these downwash devices, to actually get the exhaust to point down at the diffuser again and drive airflow and actually, again, create rear downforce from a part which is probably almost in line with the driver's hands. So the downstream effect of all of these parts is quite profound on a Formula One car.
The Ferrari looks like a very good all-round performer this year. It's a pretty good qualifier, but it's a very good race car now. And that's a very nice package to have. Talking to Alan Permain in the show yesterday, he was saying that from Lotus F1's point of view, they don't use the tyres hard enough in qualifying or in the wet, but they feel they've got a really nice race car. But Ferrari, you'd have to say, get a bit more from the tyres in the wet and in qualifying. Maybe not as much as Mercedes, but they have a great race car there underneath them, as we've seen Fernando produce many times this year. Felipe Massa, thoughts on Massa from everybody here?
I have to say, if he doesn't produce some really sterling results for the rest of the year, this could well be his last season. I can't really see why Ferrari would want to keep him on. That's pretty harsh. He's a great guy, lovely driver, all the rest of it, but he's just not fast enough anymore.
And or making mistakes.
Yeah, driving it into the wall. I think he had a great thing at the start of the year. He regained some confidence and he looked a little bit like the Massa of old, but now 2 races running, he stuck it in the wall and that's going to shatter that little bubble that he's had.
Well, and he never really goes very well at Silverstone either. His 2 bogey circuits, if you look at his career, have been Monaco and Silverstone. Yeah. So I think there was one Silverstone British Grand Prix when he spun 7 times, I think.
Right.
A lot. You know, too many times.
Alonso's very good here as well.
Alonso's very good here. Richard, thoughts on Felipe Massa?
Again, I think he's a great guy and he's a great driver. He's quick. He's an F1 driver, and that's he's made his mark in it. But I think again, he's coming to the end of his career. I think the end of this season will probably see him move on. And again, it opens up a seat for a young driver, and I think that's what we need to see in F1. We need to see more young drivers getting the chance, and especially, a Ferrari drive. It's a dream, and whether that's one of the current drivers moves in and drives with Fernando, but it's going to open up a drive somewhere along the line. That's the key.
Well, it looks as if there could be 3 or 4 slots at least for 2014 in terms of good seats.
It'd be great to have a bit of churn at the front of the grid, because I think the last 4 or 5 seasons, although they've been really entertaining, the script has basically been the same. You've had a dominant Red Bull and Vettel, Alonso's the main challenger, and then Kimi's emerged the last couple of years. But okay, Mercedes have come in now, but basically it's the same top guys and the same top cars, and I think we're ripe for a bit of fresh blood now, and just to mix it up. It'd be good to see. Shame to see Mark Webber and Massa go if that is what happens. But giving young guys like Bianchi a chance, maybe Valtteri takes a step up, or Jean-Eric Verne, who I know you're a massive fan of. If he got the Red Bull drive, what would he do? Or Danny Ricciardo?
Yeah, no, I'm a fan of Verne. I think he's a very reflexy, spectacular driver, and he's got a lot of heart, and he drives well in the race. He's a very good race driver, as he's shown this year. So it'll be interesting to see what Red Bull do with Verne next year, and Daniel. Daniel's not slow, that is for sure. The thinking at Toro Rosso at the moment is that Daniel is slightly quicker lap for lap, but Verne can put a faster race together. So we'll see what happens there. Mercedes, I think, is your 3rd drawing.
Yes, Mercedes, relatively straightforward update for them in Canada. Worked particularly well for Canada. They changed the bodywork over the back of the engine cover. We're normally used to seeing this Red Bull style with a big sort of cannon-shaped outlet letting all the hot air out the back of the car. Mercedes slimmed that down and literally just remained with a very thin shark fin hanging off the back of the engine cover, which obviously means you've got less exit area for the hot air from the radiators to exit out of the side pods. But equally, it frees up the airflow to the rear wing, which is the sort of trade-off. And when you're trying to reduce drag at places like Canada that aren't particularly hot, it was a great benefit. The shark fin itself was purely there to meet the regulations for minimum bodywork area. It doesn't have the same effect like the massive ones we saw a few years ago that have now been largely outlawed by some of the rules. And we're I've already seen the bodywork, and the bodywork's here this weekend, and I think with the conditions that we've got, certainly today at the moment, the lack of cooling and the increased rear aero performance will be a benefit for them.
Paddy Lowe making his first appearance with the team this weekend as well. Chatting to Paddy just a couple of days ago, was saying that he's basically just fact-finding at the moment, just having a look, sniff around, see what's going on. But what's our collective take on Mercedes? How good can they be for the remainder of this year? We know they're quick over one lap, but can they develop into a Ferrari-like race car? What's your view, Scarbs?
I think there's going to come a point, I think they've got a bit more growing to do this year, but I think there will come a tipping point, probably not too far away, where they will start to pull development back from this year. And I think their chances for the balance of the year are going to be very much around how aggressive Pirelli are going to go with the tyres. And we've already seen that the compound choices for the next few races are a little bit more conservative, which should start to play into Mercedes' hands. Obviously, they are struggling with tyre degradation more than the other teams. And if the European winter is as poor as it is at the moment, the European summer, could call it winter, feels like winter.
Yeah.
Again, that will play into their hands because they need the cooler weather to keep the tyres together. So, I mean, I think through the year, I think there will be more wins coming from Mercedes, but I don't think they're going to emerge with a developed car in the last handful of races and produce any kind of dominance. I think that their time will probably come much more next year when they've stopped and started again on the car development.
Richard, it's interesting. Are you surprised at the way Nico Rosberg has performed this year relative to Lewis Hamilton?
No, I think Nico has always, he's always been very quick. I think the conditions have to be right for him, and I think that they are at the moment. I think that it's, he's doing very well. I think he has his ups and downs like a lot of the drivers, but his consistency is the biggest issue for him. But it also comes with the when it comes back, you're looking at the tyres, you're looking at the management of the tyres. And I think that what happens a lot of the time with drivers is they can get too bogged down in one particular area, and they tend to follow that. And I think that's where, somebody like Ross is very, very strong at bringing his drivers back in line with focusing on what are the major issues with the car and the performance. But I think, he's a winner. He's proven that. Whether he's a champion is another question. I'm not convinced that he is, but he's definitely a winner. Lewis, as we know, is a champion. And I think he can be champion again, provided the conditions are right. But I think we talked about tyres again. Tyres is just such a big factor in all of this, and it's not working at the moment. The whole thing is not working, and there's too much focus on that issue with Pirelli, and it just needs to be resolved very quickly, and in particular for next year, because so much of the development of any F1 car is about tyre development, and that's what needs to be resolved very, very quickly.
The Frick system still in place at Mercedes. Are you surprised by that?
No, I mean, they've been running it for 2.5 years now, so I don't find it a surprise.
You think they would have learnt by now that maybe it ain't the way to go, but...
I think it works for them, and I think other teams are starting to work in that direction. I believe Lotus have progressed their system beyond the more straightforward sort of front-to-rear system that they've had since 2008. But the car's designed around it, and if they can replicate that on the rigs and get that working, I see no reason why they should take it off. I don't think their problems are in the compliance of the suspension. I think it's more to do with the aero and the geometry that they've got.
Well, we'll see on that one. Lewis Hamilton's driving this year, and Lewis in general, Anthony?
Well, I think his demeanour is really positive. He's obviously liking being at Mercedes, and leaving McLaren I think was a big step for him. It's interesting to see that he can't quite get on terms with Nico in terms of outright speed, that he's still got this brake issue, whether it's a pad issue, whether it's a carbon industry versus Hitco problem, which some people say it is, some people say it isn't. I think he's been surprised by Nico's outright pace, though. And one interesting anecdote that I was told earlier this year is that Nico's capable of riding a unicycle and juggling at the same time, which is quite a mental feat. And I mentioned this to someone who watches the sport very closely, Mark Hughes, a journalist who you know. And he said, yeah, that's why Nico's so good at driving this year's cars, because he said the challenge of driving a 2013 F1 car with so many tyre things going on, all this stuff on the steering wheel, so many parameters to handle at one time, is very suited to the way Nico's brain works. Whereas Lewis is much more of a flat-out racer, outright speed, pure performance. But that's not what's required this year. And that's why perhaps Nico's got the slight edge over Lewis so far.
I think that would apply to managing the race and managing the tyres better than Lewis. Would it apply on one qualifying lap, however? That's the question, because that's where Nico is actually doing him, isn't he? He's out qualifying him, and as a result of that, he's then giving himself the cushion he needs to race the way he wants to. And that is still the interesting thing, I believe. That
well, maybe we've just underrated Nico the whole time, and now he's got a great...
Well, maybe Nico's just got better and better and better, and he's learnt, and he's applying himself, and he's using his brain in ways that some race drivers don't. And because it's quite easy for race drivers to plateau once they get to a certain level, and they've won a lot of races in the junior categories, and then they plateau out, and they think, any problem now has got to be the car, it can't be me. But Nico appears to be a driver who's very different now from the way he was 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, and he's got a big brain on him. I mean, he's a very bright guy for a racing driver.
Much too intelligent to be a racing driver. I can't even talk to him. He speaks about 6 languages, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's very, very sharp.
Incredible guy. Lotus F1, an interesting one. Kimi Räikkönen, let's put aside what he may or may not be doing next year, but Lotus ran into a brake problem in Canada, which is quite unusual these days. We don't hear a lot about brake troubles. We have 3 brake suppliers, and generally speaking, they're rock solid. But in Kimi's case, he had a soft pedal for most of the Canadian Grand Prix, and indeed in the run-up to the race in qualifying as well. And that was, Lotus now say, a car problem. It was a cooling problem, something they'd done, a change they'd made. It was nothing to do with the Hitco brakes. You mentioned Hitco. In fact, I think it's Brembo in Carbon Industry, which is the comparison at Mercedes. And Hitco's still basically only with Lotus, although some other teams like Red Bull and Merc are starting to sniff around and see what Hitco are actually doing. But interesting, Scarbs, to see Lotus running into that sort of problem. It's unusual. I mean, you think of all the other things that can go wrong going to a Grand Prix, and actually they end up with a soft brake pedal.
It's, the trouble with brake cooling is that you've got, with engine cooling as well, but particularly with the brakes in the past few years, you've got various issues going on. You've got these very complicated brake ducts inside the wheels, and we was talking about them now, and they've got channels and ducts routing to air to everywhere. So not only have you actually got the air that goes into the scoop into the brakes to cool the brakes themselves, but you then got shrouds around the brakes which are trying to divert the hot air coming out either onto the wheel or not onto the wheel, because that actually affects tyre temperature. So you've got a whole heap of variables, and if you consider that so many races this year, in particular Canada was another one where the weather was progressing throughout the weekend, getting that right at the end of the day is something of a gamble. I mean, as much as you can ever plan these things and predict these things, a little something can go wrong, and you can either cook your tyres or cook your brakes or vice versa. And
as Richard was saying, it's all a function of the lack of testing, really. If we had more of that, these little things wouldn't be happening. And in a way, it's kind of cheating the fan, because Kimi Räikkönen, Lotus F1, Canadian Grand Prix, we want to see the guy in the car as good as it's going to go. And yet his basic weekend went away because he had a soft brake pedal.
Yeah, I think you to give fans value for money, I mean, that's something that we've concentrated a lot on in Abu Dhabi in terms of add-on value. So you want to be able to make sure that when a fan buys a ticket and they come to a race, it's not cheap. You want to make sure that they're entertained for the weekend. Now, we add all that value around the race weekend, but I think it's the duty of F1 to make sure that the track activity lives up to the price of that F1 ticket. It's a big commitment for a family of 2, 4, 6 people to go to a Grand Prix nowadays. Now, so what you want is that you're going to be entertained from Thursday all the way through to Sunday. That means good track activity. The only way you're going to get that is by allowing some form of testing, so that your heroes are up there, they're finishing races, and obviously you'll have your competition where somebody's going to go out or somebody's going to bump off somebody else, and that's fine. But at the same time, you want that the machinery itself can last the pace. And I think that comes back to your testing.
Can I suggest a further thing? And I'd be interested to get your input on this. I think we should go back to having spare cars, because there's nothing worse on a Friday or a Saturday than seeing your Sebastian Vettel or your Lewis Hamilton, or whoever it is you come to see, park the car after one lap because something's gone wrong, and then you don't see them anymore that day. And we take it now for granted. Well, he's not going to run anymore. But there was a time when you jump in the spare car and you'd still see your hero out there going round and round. Yeah. Can it be that much more expensive to the budget? Would it make that much difference?
It does make a big difference in terms of transportation. You are transporting a third car around. But I mean, most teams have that third car in a box anyway. You know, it's sitting there either in the truck or it's sitting in a transport box. So they do have it. It's only a matter of putting it together. But I always remember going, you know, listening to a couple of engineers I worked with in the past, and you know, you control the cost of a race car on the drawing board. That's where you control the cost, and that's controlled by the regulation. So again, it's the FIA's duty to really step up and start looking at this sport, start looking at how expensive it is, and really coming up with regulations that do control costs. So unfortunately, I think for the purist, it does mean standardizing some components. Maybe that's brakes, maybe that's a standard gearbox, maybe it's a standard chassis, and then you do your additions around that. And I think that's where you'll start to control the cost, and then you'll be able to have your third car. Then you'll be able to do more testing. So it goes back to those fundamentals as far as I'm concerned.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, right now, 500 people, even at a high to mid-range Formula One team, but right at the top, more than that for sure, and huge budgets, particularly at Mercedes. I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this special edition of The Racer's Edge. And I know that the fans there are very keen to hear some live music after all the rather dry words from us up here on the panel here. We have that coming up fairly soon with Grand Prairie, the band that is, well, I wouldn't say it's a brainchild of Rob Wilson. He'll probably say that he's just part of the act. But nonetheless, Rob Wilson, one of our regular stars on the show, also plays music, and he plays it with a band called Grand Prairie. And we're going to hear them live in about an hour from now. Richard, you're about to say something?
I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to all our supporters from the UK. I mean, it's our biggest fan base for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and I just want to say a big thank you. We know it's a huge commitment to come down to the Grand Prix. We definitely want to give you the best possible weekend we can, but again, a big thanks, and you know, we guarantee you a good weekend if you do come down, but we love to see you, and again, big thank you.
We're very much looking forward to getting there this year again, Richard. And a big thank you to you, the fans, for joining us in this special edition of The Racer's Edge. As I say, we'll be back again tomorrow, and there'll be lots to report then from the first running on Friday, probably in the wet. So we'll be doing our best to have a look and see what technology is appearing on the car, and Craig will be helping us there. We'll have other special guests on the show, 7 o'clock tomorrow. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us. See you then. Okay.